heard anything. Probably. We haven't been monitoring it too closely. We haven't been monitoring vaccine for us, mostly because Kelly already had COVID. I had antibodies come back, checked, and negative. Oh. So I'm wearing a microphone. Which means y'all can hear me. And I'll ask about questions about the sermon. Balcony. Need someone talking to that microphone? The one on the thing there, right there.
Hello, Mr. Microphone.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear us now?
For those of you on internet land, you can see the handout, but you can't see what I'm doing. So I'm trying to set up a microphone to pick up everyone else's voices here. We'll see. It's imperfect, just like me. But Jesus is great. I'm muted. Check, check. It's technology. It's going to do whatever it wants. Okay. Any questions on 1 Corinthians chapter 1? The service or the sermon or anything?
Can I make that comment that I told you about?
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I read somewhere where Jesus was so angry at these money changers because they were in the courtyard, which was like the only place where Gentiles could go. And so they had basically pushed them out. And so another reason for Christ's anger at these guys was that they had basically, he said, you turned my father's house into a house of money changers and thieves.
So,
But he was also just angry about the fact that they took over that courtyard,
yeah.
which is the only place where non-Jews could ever just stand and be in the house of God.
Yeah, no Gentiles were able to go past the money changers,
Right.
go to, buy the whatever's being sold in the courtyard, which should be a holy place as it was. I mean, this is where sacrifices were made, big ones, where certain things occurred that the money changers, the Gentiles weren't able to access. So that's one reason why Jesus is angry.
Yeah.
Now, his words are, as I think about it, you give me stuff to think about. When Jesus says, when he starts whipping everybody, what does he say? Turn my father's house, a house of trade.
Yeah.
This has become a moneymaker for you. But this should be the place of worship. So part of it was, yes, the Gentiles were cut out. I think Jesus' main thrust was you're using the house of God the wrong way. Yeah.
Was it a common practice for the other religions to use their temples as a way to sell their sacrifices before going in?
Was it common practice among other religions to do this in their temples?
Right. So
I can see why it would make sense for that other religions would do something like that, but you can see, like, if other religions are doing it, why they're doing it in Jerusalem would be common practice, but I don't have anything to back it up historically. I haven't read anything about that, so I'd have to look up and see if that's the case.
I remember, this is an old memory, but that they were charging exorbitant rates for stuff they were selling there, much
Yeah.
higher than what you could have bought out back for a land. But then they would say, well, your land and your land is perfect enough to actually be used to sacrifice. So that's why you have to buy this higher rate land.
Yeah, better, higher quality lamb and doves, inside the temple because, they're in the temple. Not to be crass, but I kind of see it as, when you go to a baseball game or you go to a movie theater, you buy a hot dog. I mean, it costs $5, $6 or more when you can buy a package for that amount for the same hot dogs. Maybe it's something like that too, where, you forgot to plan ahead, so now you're going to have to pay for it. So there's probably in all of the above, like it's trying to, if I'm a merchant and I'm trying to make money, I'm going to use as many angles as I can to get people to buy it. So, yeah, it's weird that they would cut themselves off from the Gentiles, though, to do that, right? Because you'd think that would make more money. So maybe that's their way of whitewashing what they're doing. Yeah, Gerard says that they're like the indulgences, where you buy this and God makes you holy, right? I mean, there's a lot of similarities. You're dead on, Gerard, in the fact that what people were doing with the sacrifices in the temple is very similar to what was going on with the indulgences in Jesus' day, which is you buy this, you pay for it, you do it, your sins are forgiven. Who's doing all the work in this process? Is it God or is it us? And the answer is it's us. And if it remains on us to save ourselves, then you read through the Ten Commandments like we had this morning. You're gone. You're done. Game over. So God has to do it. He has to be the one because we are not capable. Any other thoughts? Okay. Thank you. The goat. Yeah. We came up with a really cute, cool mural. Like you leave behind a big mural on a wall at the King Hall over at Officer Development School. So generations are going to see it. There were some that went back to early 2000s, 2001. You had murals that were up there, been there for years. And we were on the fourth, they call it the deck, right? They use sailor talk. On the fourth deck, which just means fourth floor. So there are six, no, there was four, I'm sorry. We were in a hotel with 6 stories, but this was 4, we were on the top floor, which made it fun when you're really tired from running and marching and exercising and doing all the things. Then you got to go up all the steps to the top. Oh, man. So, yeah, it was really neat. So when greatest of all time, when Paul's talking and going through 1 Corinthians, I thought, just stuck in my head like a splinter. Oh, I got to get this out. Okay. You ready for this? This is pretty mind-bendy a lot of focus type thing here. So it's okay if you don't catch everything. But my point in starting with Hinduism here is to move on to Buddhism, and then we're going to talk about New Age. Now, why would I do that? Well, because chronologically, Hinduism came first between the other two, before the other two. So you can see how Hinduism influences Buddhism, and how Hinduism and Buddhism influences that shop across the street by the subway, right? The Mystic whatever. Mystic Valley. Ooh. Is this a valley? Ooh. Very flat to me. Anyway, Mystic Plain. Ooh. Okay, so, sorry. My grandmother, she's passed away since, but I remember when I was young, she, she was into some really weird stuff. Like, she would, say, hey, Grandma, how many fingers am I holding behind my back? She would tell you every time. She knew. It was just weird stuff that she was connected to. So I understand some of that because I saw it growing up, fortunately. But a lot of this has its roots not in the United States. It goes back. Here we're going to look at 2000 BC. So, my mom's side. Right. Yeah, my grandma in Mexico, she's still around. Yeah. So, she's, I don't know how old she is. Anyhow, I've got funny stories with her. My grandma from Mexico. Okay, you got me. So, I think I may have told this in a sermon. I don't know. I was, I don't know, maybe a year or two older than Lucia. And I knew a friend from school, this girl, and I asked her where she lived, right? And we're at school, and she says, oh, that way. And I just, in my mind, I knew, then I know where you live. I knew the street, I knew the neighborhood, because I'd walk to school and stuff like that, maybe second grade. I just had it in my mind that I knew where she lived. Well, my grandma was visiting from Mexico. She was watching me, maybe my other brothers. And so she doesn't speak any English. And I didn't speak any Spanish. So I'm like, Grandma, I'm going to go visit my friend now. And, at that time, I was walking to school. I think it must have been second grade. So 7 years old. I'm walking to school every day. And you don't hear that anymore, right? Everyone gets a ride. So I knew where I was going. I knew how to get there. So I tell her, I'm going to go. I'll be back. Hey, Grandma. And she's like saying, I don't even know what. At this, in my day, I don't know. Like, I don't know what she was saying. Walked the way that I knew. And she's on the porch like, hey, don't. Like, come back. What are you doing? She's got my other brothers, so it's not like she can just run off and get me. She's got 3 other brothers of mine that she has to watch. And I walk, and off I go. And I walked it was probably a mile away. I went to this house, and I knocked on the door, and I remember this Doberman pinscher. This must not be the place. I think I maybe knocked on someone else's door. I thought, well, I guess nobody's home. I'll try again another day or something. I was walking back home, and my uncle pulls up, grabs me, throws me in the car, and drives me home. He's like, what are you doing? I was just visiting my friend, my dad's brother. So we get back to the house, and my mom picks me up and hugs me and spanks me at the same time. Right? Because she was on the one hand relieved that I'm okay, but on the other hand, she was, upset and angry with me just going off on my own. Didn't do it again. There was police there and stuff. No, this is probably a big deal. Probably shouldn't do that again. So I didn't. So that's one funny story I had with my grandma, which is funny to me, terrifying for her probably. I never talked to her about it since. Anyhow, sorry, tangent. You got it. Hinduism. Speaking of tangents, we're going to start with the history of Hinduism. Really, there's no known date. Don't have a solid date as to when Hinduism started. So like with Mormonism, you got Joseph Smith, you have the dates, you have these things. You know, with L. Ron Hubbard, you know, you have, you can see how his religion was created over time. Dianetics, right? Those old commercials, you remember? And you see that, but not with Hinduism. You don't have that. Even with Buddhism, you have a date you can work with. But Hinduism, there's no real date. And so it kind of adds this sense of, like, what was the original teaching? Was there one? How did it change over time? The earliest discovery we have of Hinduism is from 2000 BC, from the Harappa culture in the Indus River Valley. Notice how India and Hindu come from the Indus River name. Okay? So Hinduism and Indus, right? You see, like, this is coming from this region. It's very particular. Around 2000 BC, the Aryans, which was a word for noble, are thought to have entered India from the northwest. Notice also how Iran and Aryan are also related in terms of words. Aryan, Iran. Now, this will fast forward to Hitler in his day, right? He uses the Aryan nation. This is what he uses, right? It's coming from history. So the Aryan culture fell into 4 castes: priests, warriors, commoners, and servants or slaves. Their highest deity was, I'm not going to pronounce it right, Deus Iter. I have little notes, right? Notice how the similarity between Zeus, not Zeus, Zeus Pater, or even Deus Pater, translated as God the Father. You see Zeus and Deus, right? Very similar in spelling. And even this, Deus, Deus, this is what it was spelled. Peter, these words are all related. And so you see almost 2,000 years before, the Aryans had a sense of God as Father, or kind of, head over all other gods, maybe, at least in that regard. So there's something to be said there that people knew across ancient times something about God and something about his position, but it got corrupted and changed. They also had many other gods they worshiped for different reasons. That one sentence is summing up a lot. I mean, it really is. So, there's many other gods they worship for different reasons. A god for this, a god for that. Generally pretty, what's the word, practical, if you want to look at it that way. You need rain? Okay, talk to this god. You need a good shovel so it doesn't break while you're working? Talk to this god, shovel god, or something like that. So, it's vast, the number of gods that they have. As far as we understand, the old culture in India and the Aryan culture began to merge and to bring religious ideas of both the Indian culture and the Aryan culture together. Around 500 BC, Buddhism and other similar religions begin to branch off. So that's what we're going to study next week, assuming how much we get through this. 500 BC, you have Buddha showing up. Siddhartha, what's his name? Siddhartha. It's almost like Guantanamo, but it's not that. I don't remember. We'll learn it next week. So, this guy Siddhartha becomes the Buddha around 500 BC. And then, of course, there's other religions that branch off of Hinduism. In 1200 AD, the Muslims begin to enter into the region of India. 1500 to 1947, India is ruled by the Portuguese and British empires. Which disciple went to the region of India? Is it Thomas? You're right, Thomas, yeah. We had a student at the seminary when I was there, Thomas Manikaraj, which means Pearl King. Monica means pearl, Raj means king. So anyway, his dad, I think, was president of like the Lutheran Church in India. So anyway, Thomas is named after Thomas the disciple, right, who was in that region. So you've got, then, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, all within the country of India. It wasn't until 1947 that India gained its independence with the help of a guy we know as Gandhi. 1847. What was the movie? There's a famous actor, I don't remember his name. Ben Kingsley, that's the one, yeah. He did a movie where he, you see Gandhi, before he's Gandhi, as a lawyer on a train. I think it starts out, and he starts to discover his roots in India, and really jumps in head first and uses peaceful protest to make change in India, and it ends up with people gaining independence from the Portuguese and British Empire. So a big deal. Yeah. Any questions on the history of Hinduism? Notice I skip over like 1,700 years. Nothing, from historical perspective, nothing major really happened. You start to see branches, you see Confucianism, and things start to merge and split, and other things come and go, because it's kind of this big Play-Doh ball of theology. And people mold these thoughts into the way that they think is most faithful to Hinduism, or the ideas within Hinduism, which we'll get to. So there's a lot of branches. Yeah, Chad. Yeah, there was a guy, I didn't write his name down. I saw it, and I didn't include him, but because I didn't really see anything too major, like changing anything for them, or changing the religion that I know of. So that's why I didn't put him in there. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. It's probably bad, but we're doing an overview. We're not trying to study and know everything about this. Just the idea is to get a sense of the fact that Hinduism is very, very old. It's very, very broad theologically, but it has its roots in India. Okay, so next section, religious Hindu texts. This is going to get kind of complicated. This is where things get really interesting. You have the Vedas. Supposedly, the Vedas were recorded by the Aryan priestly class and handed down from parent to child, right? So kind of like the Levites, right? Where the priests and the fathers and children worked together on these things. That's kind of how it was for the Aryan priestly class, is that they handed down from parent to child things that they did orally. It was handed down through oral tradition. Then they recorded it. Over time, they started to record down these oral traditions. And so these, as far as we can tell, date back to the 1500s BC. How long they went back orally, we don't know. So these Vedas, these things that were written down, are broken into 4 subgroups. The Rig Veda, these are over 1,000 chants to Aryan gods, also records the beginning of the universe. The Yajur Veda, used during sacrifices. Sama Veda, which is the musical expansion on the chats, on the Rig Veda. So they expand even more on the first one. And then the Atharva Veda. These are prayers and charms against everyday things, you know, like don't let me get bit by a snake. Normal everyday stuff. Yeah. And those are the Vedas, and those are broken down. Remember, this is coming through the priestly class. So the priests are the ones that oversee this. That's important because it's going to have a change down the road. Then you have the Brahmanas. These are texts used by Hindu priests about time, place, and preparation for rituals. So these came later after the Vedas. The Aranyakas, texts used for ascetics living in the woods. These also came later. So what's an ascetic? What is that? Is that the way you decorate your living room as the ascetics? No. These are people who live apart from other people. They give up things like eating to get closer to, pick a thing, you know, to get closer to themselves, to get closer to nature, to get closer to some divine something. So, you know, people who are fasting for a reason or another are separating themselves from community so that they kind of take their spirituality and they put it in a pot and they boil it down so it's super hyper condensed. That's the feeling of what's going on when they separate themselves. So the Aranyakas, these are texts that were used by these people living in the woods. Thing to note that I didn't write down, the interesting thing about these Aranyakas is they're not coming from priests, right? So you see a shift that moves from where it's the priests that control all the religious stuff. Now it starts to go out into other people who are highly, highly spiritual. So you see a shift moving away from that. You have the Upanishads. Now these are interesting. It's actually, the Upanishads are part of a larger text, but there's these conversations that are written between people, like a father and a son. And there these philosophical and religious ideas. And these texts also, the Upanishads, came later after the Vedas. Unlike the Vedas, these texts promote that anyone, not just priests, can experience deep spirituality. So, you know, a father and a son are talking, and the son has been going to study, and he studied priestly things and this and that, and he comes home, and he tells the dad, I'm learning all this stuff, and I'm learning all these holy things. And the dad starts to ask him questions about kind of everyday life stuff. He doesn't really have any answers. And so then the dad kind of whips out some, you know, knowledge quip about, I don't know, pick a clay jar in the house that's, you know, is it empty or filled or what is it? And, you know, I don't know. I'm making this as I go right now. You know, well, it's empty, Dad. He's like, well, maybe it's filled with air or God or something. Ooh, there's some wisdom that comes from this. So there's these conversations that these are written in, and so it's not just like Paul saying, hey, do this. Hey, don't do that. Knock it off, church in Corinth. Don't be silly. It's more of a philosophical conversation between two people to kind of squeeze the wisdom out of everyday stuff. Does that make sense? And the Bhagavad Gita, this is the one, part of a long poem. So a lot of this is very poetic, musical, conversational. The Bhagavad Gita brings together what it looks like between the beliefs of Hinduism and everyday life. Again, like the Upanishads. Things are becoming more everyday. So it's not just, we're going to go to the priests to do spiritual things. It's not just going to be on a specific day, a holy day or whatever. Now it starts to move into, this is a part of your everyday life as everybody technically be a guru, is where gurus come from, is from Hinduism. Any questions on texts?
Non-historical texts, unlike the Old Testament.
Yeah, you're not going to see, during the reign of King Darius or during Caesar Augustus when he was, doing this, and Quirinius was governor over Syria. You don't have these timestamps of who's doing what. It's just more general wisdom overall. Any questions on that? The text beyond that? Okay. So now we're going to get into major beliefs of Hinduism. This is where it's going to get really interesting. So if I start to go kind of sideways, let me know, and we'll see what we can do. So Brahman, and you notice, remember, one of the texts was the Brahmanas, right? Brahman is the sacred source that everything comes from, according to Hinduism, okay? I'm not saying this is what we teach and believe, just, Hinduism believes this is the sacred source that everything comes from. So everything is holy because it reflects the sacred source in some way. It's ultimately beyond space and time. The way some people will put it is like there's a fire and it's going. Let's say you're sitting there and you're just looking at the fire, you're out at camp, and sometimes a little spark will kind of flicker off the fire. It's still fire, right? But it's not attached anymore. And so people will teach, that's kind of us, is we're detached from the main source, but we still have this, sense of fire to us, this connection to the original fire. And so the goal is to get there again. The how, this is where you start to get all different branches of religion off Hinduism, Buddhism, and things like that. We'll get to that. So Brahman is like the main source, right? This is the main thing. And everything in creation, everything you see, comes off of this. So when somebody says to you, namaste, namaste, you've heard this, right? I know there's a hacker, people that sell, I don't remember, like pancake mix or something. It's like namaste, pancake mix. But this is something about like bowing to the divine that is in you, right? When people say namaste and they bow, they're saying there's something in you that is divine, and I am bowing down to that. And then if you say the same thing back, that's what you're saying in return, right? It's like a part of you I'm worshiping, that divine part, that little spark that you are, I'm worshiping that. Kind of weird, right? So be careful with what you say. So that's the Brahman. Everything comes from that. That's the main source. Atman, right? Atman is the divine essence that all people share. Right? So everyone has a connection together, they would say, that is Atman. That is like imagination. We all have imagination, right? So it's almost like there's this pool of imagination and we all draw from it. And that's what we would call individual imagination. But it's not just you that has it, it's a part of a greater whole. Jack?
Would this be the same way as the force was the force?
Yeah, but not everyone has the force. You got to have midichlorians. But yes, the same idea. This is Star Wars. This is when you're right. You're dead on. When you see movies, they're pulling from stuff like this, right? So may the force be with you, right? We say, we hear that. May the force be with you. What's the force? Well, in this case, you can almost say it's the Atman. May the Atman be with you. May the Brahman, fill you up, kind of a thing. Yeah, you're dead on, Chad. You're right on. Maya is the next thing. The world is illusion, and nothing is permanent. So when one thing dies or is destroyed, its essence moves on to something else. What do we call it when something dies and comes back to life? Reincarnation. Now, in Jesus' case, we call it resurrection because he's not going to die again. Here in this teaching, is you go through this constant death, rebirth, right? So when you hear people say, I've had 300 past lives, and in one of those past lives, I was a general for the, Italian army or something. I mean, the weirdest stuff, right? They went and talked to a guru who figured out their past lives. Sure. I'm sure it has nothing to do with like money changers in the temple, right? I mean, yeah. So the sense of Maya is what you see around you isn't real. Because it's going to decay, right? It doesn't last forever. And so that's what this word Maya is. Like the world is illusion. Nothing is permanent. It's going to decay and then come back and be rebuilt to something else. Now, scientifically, we kind of have something like this, right? What's it, the law of thermodynamics? One of these laws of thermodynamics says what about energy? You can't destroy it. You can never destroy energy. So you and I are made up of atoms and things that are bouncing around, electrons and protons. Somehow we're stuck together through this. And so maybe a Hindu would say, well, actually, we're this energy and it just constantly recycles. Weird, huh? Starting to get mind-bending. Karma! Hey, we've heard of this. Right? Karma is exactly what you think of it. What goes around comes around. Every act has a moral consequence. Any questions so far? Okay. Samsara, the wheel of life. That creation is constantly born, dying, and coming back in another way. So, speaking of this idea of karma and samsara, what happens if you're a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad person your whole life? What's going to happen to you, according to this teaching? You come back as something else on a lower state. So if you're really bad, maybe you come back as a rock, which is a possibility, right? According to this teaching. If you're good, you start to, go up in the religious food chain, if you want to call it that. So it's not just that you're just, you're born, you live, and you die. It's that your actions in this life have an impact on what your next one's going to be like. Now, well, they would say that there's something in the rock, about that rock, that does have some divinity to it. Something divine about the rock. Because it's made out of the main, if I have Play-Doh, and if I pull off a piece of Play-Doh, I make a little ball out of it. They would say that ball has a connection to the main one, right? Even though you pulled it off, you ripped off a piece, it's still Play-Doh. Both of them are Play-Doh. And so they would say that rock is taken apart from the divine essence. So there's something divine about it. Everything. So we'll get to this later, but this leads into what kind of food are you going to eat if you think that this is the case? You're going to avoid meat because you don't want to kill something. Plants are lower on the level of importance. So you can eat plants, but when you start eating animals, you're starting to eat the divine essence, right? You're killing something. And so you'll see a lot of vegetarians in Hinduism. That's the reason why. They respect in these teachings that if you starve, even to death, it's very respectable. Isn't that weird to think? But it's because you're not killing anything. You know, there's a story of a guy who's meditating out in the woods, and the scorpion comes and stabs him with his tail, right? Stings him. So the guy takes the scorpion and he moves it. He's back and he sits down and starts meditating. What does it do? Comes back, gets him again. So it moves him. And multiple times he does this. What would we do? You know, take it out. But the teaching is, you know, that all things have the divine in it, and that you have to respect everything, and you have to be very careful about, you know, you don't even hurt a fly because there's divine whatever inside of it. And so your goal is to harm nothing, which is why if you starve to death, it's kind of this noble thing where you're harming nothing, I guess, except yourself. But I guess that doesn't count. Which leads us to moksha, right? Which is release from this wheel of creation. Moksha, you can get out. There's a way out. You don't have to be born and live and die all over again every time. There's a little hole, there's a little loophole, and you can get through it. So how do you do that? Well, you let go of self, right? And you become part of the whole. So you don't use the words I and me. You would speak more of like we and us. So, you know, there is no like me, I, there's no stuff that you own. There's no ownership. There's just a sense of you're a part of this greater thing. And you kind of let go of creation and its desires. And you can see, if you know anything about Buddhism, you can see the connections to Buddhism. You let go of this world. You let go of your desires. You let go of the selfish things. You let go of greed and whatever it is. Even to the point of, you break up your family. You leave your family. And you leave everybody behind. And it's considered maybe a noble thing. Because you're just letting go. Suicide is not a negative thing in Hinduism. Why would it be? Right? Starving to death. Great. Super noble. Once you leave this wheel, samsara, once you get out of that, then you're a part of that fire again. You're a part of that whole. You've lost self. You're no longer you. You're a part of the bigger divine, I don't know how else to put it. You're released. And so it's not heaven, right? Because when we say heaven, will we still be individuals? Sure. You're not going to lose you. You're going to have a new body. Which means your body is going to be separate from somebody else's body, which is going to be separate from somebody else's body. So we're still going to be individuals, but we're going to be individuals in such a way that we're connected through Christ as the body. Here, if you get to this moksha, you don't have a body. You don't have a self. There is no identity that you have. You are lost in the whole of that nirvana thing. So, does this sound familiar? You've heard these teachings, these things that you see out there in the culture today in the United States. When did yoga become popular? 70s, 80s, 60s? 60s? Okay. Another thing that you see in Hinduism that you don't really get in many other religions is the caste system. So the caste system is you have layers of where you fall. You're in a caste. You're in a hierarchy. You have priests. You have warrior nobles. You have merchants. You have peasants. And then you have the untouchables. You're not allowed to mix the castes together. So if you're in the priestly caste, you don't marry someone from the warrior noble caste or the merchant caste. You keep it in-house. And you definitely don't marry the untouchables. Those people are gross, right? They do the worst jobs that can possibly exist. They're living practically on the street. They are, doing the dirtiest jobs that you could possibly think of, barely making ends meet. And I'll come back to that. And Christians are considered casteless. This is really interesting. In India, when you apply for a job, Thomas was telling me this, they ask for your caste. They're not supposed to. I think they're technically not supposed to, but there's still a sense of, okay, what is your caste? Maybe they'll ask you in an interview. And as a Christian, you're casteless. Now, this doesn't mean you're lower than untouchables. You're just outside the system entirely. We're like, what do we do with you? It's kind of weird. So in some ways, it's a benefit because, you're not discriminated on your caste. But in other ways, you don't get the benefits of the caste system, like if you're higher up in the caste or something like that. So it's kind of a weird place to be. There's a lot of Christians in India. There's a lot of Lutherans in India. Let's see. So priests, warrior nobles, merchants, peasants, untouchables. There are. They don't have... that's if somebody, let's say, married outside from one caste to another, would they have to convert, downwards to the hierarchy or something? I'd have to look into that. I don't know. I think, I don't know, you just don't go out of the system. What happens if they do? What's that? Yeah, so the Amish have something similar where if you get married to an Amish person marries a non-Amish person, either the non-Amish person becomes Amish or you're out, right? Well, you see this in a lot of places. Roman Catholicism, you'll have grandma. You don't tell grandma that the grandson Jimmy is dating a girl that's not Roman Catholic. You definitely wouldn't tell her if they were getting married, right? Because, that would just upset the whole household. I had a member of my church in California who wouldn't become a member because he was afraid of the consequences it would have on his parents and grandparents, and what kind of impact on their family that would have. So it's not just the Amish they have this. You've heard of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. She's supposed to marry a Greek guy. I don't know why I've seen this. So do we have caste systems, unspoken? In a way, maybe, I guess, but Pastor Mars.
The Christians are considered casteless, but there's still remnants of that goes on. So people with eight higher castes are often more able to become pastors or higher level church leaders.
Oh, interesting.
In the Christian church.
So coming from a caste still resonates for Christians who are casteless.
Yeah, it's just, I read about how the untouchables are treated. It's just a small person who ever saw in the States. If a young child gets a new dress,
Yeah.
they have to put it in the mud. They cannot wear it.
Brand new. So Pastor Mars says, the untouchables are treated terribly. If you get a new dress as a little girl in the untouchable caste, he's saying you got to throw it in the mud before you can wear it, because you have to almost desecrate it in a way, because you're not allowed to wear something like that. That's incredible. Kathy asked the question, how did the priests become priests? Are they finished with their reincarnation cycle? So the priests become priests because their parents were priests. And that's like, well, then what about their parents? What about their parents? I mean, it just kind of always has been for thousands of years. And so they've always been priests. It's just kind of the way it always is. So it's almost the worst form of we've always done it this way. Right? Which we hear, not only in Hinduism, but in the church. And so are priests finished with the reincarnation cycle? No, not necessarily. Because they're here on the planet. Now, is this the last step before they get out of this cycle? Before they're released from this kind of constant grind of dying and rebirth? Are the priests at the last level? I mean, it's possible, but in Hinduism today, they would say that it's possible for anybody, even I don't know, maybe not an untouchable, but I guess, I mean, you're higher up as a priest. You're higher up, so odds are good. Dr. Bond says, ideas also is that the person is untouchable because of how poorly they lived their previous incarnation. Yes, I'm glad you said that. I wanted to get to that. They're born into a caste, but what that person is born into, why that person is born into that family is because of how they lived their last incarnation. So the idea is, you're in the priestly class or you're in the higher class, that's because you were good. This is your reward from a previous life. If you're in the untouchable caste, it's because you were a terrible person in the previous life. And so your caste, no matter what it is okay with everybody. You're not allowed to move in this life from one caste to another. It just doesn't happen, because then you are somehow manipulating the system. And you can't manipulate it except through letting go of everything and just accepting your caste. So the untouchables just have to accept this is their caste. In a past life, they were terrible people, and so they're getting what they deserve, if you want to look at it that way, from a previous life. Now we know there's no such thing as previous lives. It doesn't exist. So from our perspective, it's a terrible injustice. But if you look at it from the perspective of someone who's born and raised in that country and in that religion, you can see why it would be okay. That little girl was a terrible person, like a Hitler in a previous life. She was Hitler, so yeah, she deserves to throw her dress in the mud. It's just, for us, it's really weird to think about. Other teachings include yoga, which we could translate in English into yoke, right? Something you carry. So you have jnana, right? Knowledge yoga, karma yoga, which is what you would think it is, bhakti yoga, which is your devotion, your time spent praying, and all these things. Raja yoga, or royal yoga, associated with meditation. Hatha, or force yoga, which is what people do around here for exercise. And so you have these different yogas. The one that people in the United States use is stretching and poses and things like that. But it comes out of Hinduism. There's a teaching there that when you do these things, it's getting you closer to the Brahman, right? It's getting you to let go of the things in this world. And so if you go to kind of a hardcore yoga place, the instructor or whoever is going to bow, say namaste, and everyone bows and says namaste back, and then they do these yoga poses, because the religion is intertwined with what they're exercising. Now, if you got a soccer mom, from wherever, that's just kind of peripheral for her. She's just there for the exercise. Is it possible to do yoga and have a clean conscience and say, this isn't going to impact my belief system? I mean, sure. Are you playing with fire? You could be. Could be. Yeah, Gary says it gets into your head, and I mean, shrewd as serpents and gentle as doves. So, there are instructors that aren't like full-blown Hindu. They just see the benefit of doing the stretches and poses and things like that because it's good for your core, right? Your stomach and your back and your legs, and things like that. And so there's a human element to it, an earthly element. It says, yeah, these things are good for the body. Yes. Christian yoga instructors, which is weird. Yeah. Yeah. Christian yoga is what they read Psalms. Well, they sing what? You say they start with a prayer, a Bible verse, then you have Christian hymns in the background, Christian songs, then you close with prayer, scripture. Okay. So, I mean, is it possible? Absolutely. We should know where it's originally coming from. To know, to have discernment about what we do. I'm not saying that if you do yoga, you're a terrible Christian. That's not what I'm saying. Just know that it comes from Hinduism. And, in some cases, they have intentionally used, certain Hindu teachers have intentionally used this to get a foot in the door to teach people more about Hinduism. So, be careful with that. But as long as we know, we know. Another teaching, which I mentioned earlier, take care of animals, which can include being vegan, but definitely includes not harming cows. So if you go through India, you're going to see cows walking around. And if it's a merchant stall and he's got something the cow wants to eat, the cow's going to eat it. No one's going to stop the cow. If you ever watched Around the World in 80 Days, there's a scene where they're in India, and this one guy sees a cow going for something, and he says, he shoots the cow, knock it off, stop. And then everybody starts chasing him. He's like, what's going on? Why is this happening? Because they consider cows to be sacred. Why is that? There's a sense of, a cow doesn't have to die in order to give. Right? So milk is provided from a cow. It's a continual kind of like life-giving source. Or they're also considered sacred because of what they represent, strength, things like that. So cows are a big deal in India. And I think it comes from the Aryan teachings that they had so many years ago, and it just kind of enfolded themselves into their teaching today. Kathy asks, what about yogis? Is this part of Hinduism? Where do they fit in the caste system? Like Yogi Berra? No. I'm kidding. Is that bad? He was pretty funny, though. A pretty smart guy. I'm not going to lie. What do you say when you come to a fork in the road? Take it. Right? I don't know, Kathy. I'd have to do some homework. I didn't... if I had to guess, these are people who are gurus that oversee different yogas, right? That's the connection. Expert in their particular yoga, maybe. So you would go see a yogi to improve yourself in a certain area of these yogas. don't remember off the top of my head. I hope that answers your question. Number 4, how do we share Christ? We got 2 minutes. Again, like everything, what do we have in common? Look at what we have in common. And what do we have in common? Well, we want release from this life. This isn't all there is, right? The creation as we see it is real, but it's not going to last forever. So we definitely agree on that. We would teach that Christ is going to redeem it. He's going to fix everything. So, are things not as good as they can be? Yeah, they're not as good as they can be. Will they get put right? Yes, but it's not by our own human ability. It's not letting go of the world. It's in Christ, having faith and hope in His Word. What are some differences? Well, I've got a few here. Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is uno, one. One God. There's only one God. That's a big difference. 1 Corinthians, you have a passage here, therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know an idol has no real existence. And there's no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist. One Lord, Jesus Christ, for whom are all things and for whom we exist. What about earning your way to heaven, or whatever they call it, Brahman? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So we're only saved by the work of Jesus, not by our own works. Then in Hebrews 9:27, just as it's appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. So Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for Him. So we die once. There is no reincarnation. It doesn't exist. How do we know this? Because Jesus makes it clear in His Word that these things are real. What is real? So the goal is find what we have in common. Listen, ask questions. If you find somebody who teaches these things, that's always a goal for everyone. Politically, religiously, whatever, vocationally. Ask questions. Listen. Because people want to tell you. Someone came up to you and said, why do you believe what you believe? Whoa, that'd be cool. I'd love to share that. People want to share. So, those are just some verses there. Just some ideas to have. Sharing Christ. A very quick overview of Hinduism. Any other questions? We're getting to the end of time here. Not the end of time, but our end of our time in Bible study. Maybe we are getting to the end times. I don't know. Believe that it is. Every generation. Okay, let's see. Maybe in the context of letting go of everything, escaping the cycle with the Brahman, we could introduce the biblical understanding of denying ourselves. Yeah. Right? Deny ourselves, take up our cross. So yeah, there's a sense of living for the community, living for your neighbor. But you're not going to deny yourself insofar as you'll leave your family and go live in the woods and live an ascetic life. You deny yourself in order to serve the people closest to you. Yeah, that's a good connection. Thank you. All right. What do they say about John the Baptist? In the wilderness? Well, John the Baptist was following the pattern of the prophets. And the prophets were kind of weird, right? But I think the part of that is to get people to listen and pay attention to what the prophets are saying. Now, the prophets got to back up what they say, right? They have a prophecy that is in the future, and it doesn't come true, they're not a real prophet. If they're spouting something that is apart from God's word and God's will, they're not a real prophet. So, Yeah, I mean, there is something, there are Christians who have gone into the wilderness too. When you have Saint Anthony, not Anthony and Cleopatra, or Anthony and Cleopatra, but there's a Saint Anthony who lived in the wilderness that people thought, like if you like stood outside his place where he was by himself, you could be healed, or things like that. So Christianity does have asceticism, right? Getting out and living and letting go. You kind of have it in monasteries, right? Monks. You don't own anything. You have a little shack or a room. But the danger is that you separate yourself from other people who God has put you there to serve. So, yeah, don't go off and be a monk, because what are you doing? You're denying all the help that you can give to your neighbor, just so that you can be, quote unquote, more holy. Yeah, Martin Luther had a big problem with that. That's a fact. Anything else? All right, we got more folds in our brains now. Let's pray. Lord, you are God. You are the one God with you, with the Son and the Holy Spirit. You've called us here not because we have any extra ability or we've been extra good, but because we need you. You've called us to be faithful by your word. Well, help us to reach out to those around us who also need your word, and let us speak your word of truth and love, being gentle as doves and shrewd as serpents, so that your kingdom would increase exponentially by your work of the Holy Spirit through us, by your Son. We pray this in his most precious name. Yeah, thank you. Surgery. I'm excited. I won't be, like, I told, someone asked my name the other day, Jaime. He said, Jaime? Jaime? No. Is that what it sounds like? Must be. Jaime. Jaime. All right. Have a good day, those of you who are still online.